Thank you, Dr. Podgorski, for that great introduction and for setting me up for what I hope to be a very exciting night for everybody. And a little bit of feedback here. I see a lot of faces of people that I know, and I'm so excited that you're here. But I'm also super excited for the people I don't know, because it means you probably haven't heard me talk about bees. And I like talking about bees because bees are super cool. So first, I want to know from you guys, how many of you have ever looked at a bee flying and landing and foraging off of a flower? Raise your hand. How many have looked at a bee and enjoyed it, I hope? Okay. How many of you have had the chance to hold a bee in your hand? Awesome. How many people in the room have been stung by a bee? Right? Becoming so scared of them, right? Sucks. Okay, now tell me, all right, so how many of you were stung by a male bee? Raise your hand. A few of you. That's very interesting. If you were stung by a bee, how many of you were stung by female bees? All right. Okay, one person in the room is going to tell me why that's going to be just females that stung you. Right there, you. Uh-huh. Yes, she is so right. She said only female bees have stingers. And that's true because the stinger is a modification of an egg-laying device, and only the girl bees can lay eggs, and the boys can't. So if you can recognize a boy bee, you can pick them up and not worry about being stung. And in fact, the entomology club that's located right outside the door has a couple of boxes of male bees that you can reach into and you can rub them and pet them. So it's a fuzzy box for you to touch bees in. It's awesome. So make sure you go out here and look at those. And just like the Oprah Winfrey show, you all are going to get coloring books tonight. So yay, you're all winners. Okay. So you're going to get bee coloring books, and they'll be at the door, at the entrances, and out this way. So make sure you take a coloring book home with yourself, okay? We didn't provide crayons, sorry. All right. So let's go on with my talk. I would like you to be yourself tonight, okay, and enjoy. So I am going to I'm going to frame some sections of my talk with a little bit of poetry. I'm not the best, but bear with me. I want the bees to tell you their story, and that's what the poetry's for. It's the voice of the bees. So for all the beautiful reasons that be, the mother bee said, I lay many eggs that hatch into larvae that eat and grow until they are pupae. Pupae inside of their hardened cocoons transform to adults that emerge to fly soon. Though I will never see my offspring take flight, I know of their beauty. In that, I delight. So let's look at what Mother Bee sees. Bee diversity, that means there's a lot of bees on our planet, more than 20,000 species. And species are different kinds of things. So over 20,000 species of bees. In North America, here where you live, there's over 4,000 species of bees. And we care about bees because they help us make food. They're part of our food security, and we're going to talk a lot more about that later. But they're also visiting flowers in our wildland and helping flowers reproduce in the wildlands so that our wildlands can always have flowers that we get to visit in the springtime and during the summer. And then again, I bet a lot of the women here, a lot of the young women too, have jewelry that are bees or butterflies or dragonflies. So the bees are beautiful, along with other insects, and we love them because they bring us happiness. They put a smile on our face. Okay, they please us. So at the USDA Pollinating Insects Museum here at Utah State, and located off campus right now, there are over 1.5 million specimens of bees located just here on pens that people use for research and look at. Now, I bet most of you, when you think of bees, think of honeybees. And honeybees are kept in hives, like the ones you see here that are laid out across an almond orchard, used for commercial pollination. And this is my friend Gordy, who works with bees out in California. So these are man-made boxes, and inside these boxes are things called frames, which they're the rectangles, and they're full of little cells in which the worker bees can store things, and we'll take a closer look at that in a second. Inside these colonies or hives is a queen, her daughters who are workers, and then at some point in the colony cycle, they'll have male bees that are called drones. And they all live in one big community, and they collaborate together, and they're all like one big family. And so we call them social. They're truly social bees. They always live in a colony like this. And the colony can live for many years because the queen can live for many years. The workers might only live 8 weeks, but what the workers are doing is going out and finding food for their other sisters who are growing, and those are from eggs laid by their mother. And they're also generalist foragers, meaning they go and they visit lots of kinds of flowers. So here's a closer look at some bees in my friend Jamie's backyard in Logan. And what he's done is he's opened up his hive and he's pulled out one of those frames for you to see that in the middle of this frame are where the brood are. So these are all our cells that are covered over, and so inside that is a developing bee. And then on the outside here is where they've stored nectar, which they've mixed with a little bit of bee spit and kind of processed so that it turns into honey, which we extract and eat ourselves, right? And then on the outside, these colorful little dots are cells that are filled with pollen. And what you'll notice is that a lot of these pollen cells are different colors. That's because I just told you that the bees are generalist. So they go out and they visit lots of different kinds of flowers, and different flowers have different colors of pollen. So those are different colors of pollens from different plants. So this is what a life cycle of a honeybee looks like. So the queen, the mother, lays an egg in one of those cells, and then the larva starts to develop, and her sisters bring her food over time. They keep feeding her. Okay, so they bring her nectar and they bring her pollen. And eventually she becomes a larva that's so fat and so big, she doesn't want to eat anymore. So she seals off her cell and kind of silkens herself in there, and then starts to pupate. So she goes through metamorphosis, the change in a whole body form, into this pupal stage, which is kind of a wrapped up adult. And so that pupa has to shed one more little skin before she becomes an adult bee that can chew her way out, and then she goes and helps raise more sisters. And that's thousands of sisters that get raised this way. So bumblebees are another bee that you might recognize, and they're also social. They have a queen, worker bees, and at a certain time of the colony cycle, they'll have males. But the queen in this situation only lives for 1 year. So the queens are kind of born in the fall, they mate, and then they go kind of hunker down and spend the winter in some little nook or cranny or in the thickets of a yard or in the woods. And then they come out and they start a new colony in the spring and make a lot of new babies, and then they die. The mother bee dies. So only the queens survive for a year, the rest of the workers only for a few weeks. So they're also social bees. They're also generalist pollinators or flower visitors. And they can be found out in the wild just naturally, and they can also be commercially reared and sold for pollination in particular crops. So here's where you might find bumblebees nesting in a knothole of an old snag. I've seen them in like a pile of wood in a barn. They could be in like a stack of hay that's not been moved around in a barn. They can also, this is one of the commercial shelters put out in a watermelon field, and these boxes are called quads, but they have 4 colonies of bumblebees, and that's the way they're sold. And then so you can purchase them to use just for pollinating in certain crops. But most of the bees in the world are solitary. They don't live in these social groups. They might hang out with each other in aggregations. They might live nearby, like in an apartment complex, but they keep their own houses to themselves. So the female bee, though, instead of having daughters who do all the work for her, each female bee has to do everything. So she has to go out and get food, lay the eggs, take care of the nest. She has to do everything. And she only lives for a few weeks, and then her offspring develop without her, and then they spend the winter as immature stages and then hatch out the next year. So they have a 1-year life cycle, and they live without their mother pretty much their whole lives. So they can be generalist or specialist foragers. And most of them are wild, but a few of them are managed. And I'll show you some examples of those because they're what I work with. So those solitary bees, whoa, what is happening? Is somebody leaning against a wall somewhere? So should I hit one of these projector? I think that's the one. Yeah, there it goes, Greg. I think I got it. Okay. That's fine. Okay. So the solitary bees will nest in reeds or stems that they can get the pith out of, and they'll go and they'll forage for nectar and pollen, which they'll make into a paste. They'll lay an egg on it, and then a larva will develop on this lifetime supply of food. She'll never see her mother. Okay? This is an example of a nest in a reed, and I want to point out that the pollen masses here with an egg on it are quite large compared to pollen masses up here with an egg on it. And that's because the mother bee can control the sex of her children. So she puts her female offspring in the back of the nest and her male offspring towards the front of the nest because the males are smaller and they hatch out first. So now nobody gets chewed up or eaten alive if one of the back ones emerges before one of the front ones. Okay? So it's all this great process. And this is a cell actually or a nest where you can see that each cell is partitioned with its mud. And so a mason bee made this nest. They use mud. But these cells are made by a leaf cutting bee, and you can see that they are wrapped up in leaf pieces. So it'd be a tunnel with leaf pieces in it, and then that's where the larva develops inside there. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you, this is a rock face full of holes that bees dug. It's bees that have such a big head and big jaws that they can burrow into sandstone and make their little nest in there. It's pretty amazing. And these are in southern Utah. These are examples of bees that nest in the ground. So the mother bee has to dig a hole and make a little portal so she can find it again after she flies away and comes back. And then underground, she has to make a tunnel and then individual galleyways and cells in which she puts a provision mass and lays an egg on it, seals it off, and never sees her baby again. Most bees are like this, and they're in your yard, I promise you. Now I want to show you one of those, a special bee that nests underground. And this is called the Alkalibi, and it's a bee that you can find in Walla Walla, Washington. They naturally occur there, and people also kind of make sure that they stay there on their farms because these are alfalfa specialists, and they help to pollinate the alfalfa. They're a ground nesting bee, and so they have to excavate the hole, collect nectar and pollen, and the larvae and the bees develop underground. So what I have for you here is a video. Let's see if I can get it to turn on. There it comes. So just listen to see if you can hear the buzz of what's going on here. It's a massive, millions of bee nesting aggregation called a bee bed. You hear the buzz? Not to be worried, these bees don't want to sting you. They're good. All these little bumps are holes that either they've crawled out of or they've excavated anew. Some of the pipes you saw are sub-irrigation pipes. The bees like it moist underground. They also like salt on the top. So the people who own these bee beds, which are passed down through generations, they take care of them because they want them to stay there. They even slow the traffic down through the neighborhoods that these bees occur. Pretty cool. The most bee diversity you can find will be in the deserts across the globe. Not in the tropics like you think about other animals, or the most diverse animal collections are in Ecuador and the tropics, but not for bees. Bees are mostly found in the desert because look at all that bare ground, the easy to excavate soil, and certain times of year, tons of floral resources. So most bees are underground, but some of them haven't even been discovered yet because they're a little bit hard to get to and may not have been found and may only come out every other year to visit flowers. Let's look at some of these beautiful bees. These are from the collection here at our bee lab. Beautiful iridescent colors. Yes, these occur in the United States. Super fuzzy, super beautiful. We know they're bees because their hairs are not just straight. We know they're bees because they collect pollen to feed to their babies, not other insects, not meat eaters. Here's some more. One that gathered tons of pollen. Big fuzzy ones. This is the one that drills through the sandstone. Look at that big fat head. More beautiful ones, and this one is tropical. It's an orchid bee. Its long tongue is to go deep, deep down into a flower that has a structure that this perfectly fits in. Glorious, aren't they? Let's look close up at some of those hairs. Look at how feathery these hairs are and how great they would be for collecting pollen. They kind of look like chicken feathers. Actually, at first glance, that kind of looks like a chicken head, doesn't it? And then this pollen collection, all these tiny grains of pollen on each of these legs. A lot of bees collect bees on their legs, and some collect it on their bellies. Here's that beautiful bee from the tropics close up. Look at the dimply iridescence of this bee. They look like, when they're foraging in the wet rainforest, they just kind of like flicker like water droplets out there on the leaves. It might be hard to find these. They're attracted to orchids though. And actually with their special legs here, they collect oils off of orchids and use them as aphrodisiacs to seduce females to come in. Cool. All right, so let's move on to like why these bees might be important to us, the nutritious reasons that be. So the foraging bees, the ones out there collecting, will say, we'll go out among flowers hunting nectar and pollen, lured by scents and colors before petals have fallen. Our bodies will transport the bounty we've taken to fresh open flowers for fertilization. Good humans will beam with delight at our deeds, since our visits deliver fresh fruits, nuts, and seeds. All right, let's think about food. This is what USDA says your plate should look like. So you should have mostly fruits and vegetables and protein with some grains and then dairy on the side. So bees are important for 3/4 of this plate. Fruits, vegetables, and protein, they help to get put onto your table because of what they do out in the environment. They also help with dairy, which you'll figure out later. So of the flowering plants in general, 90% of them need pollinators. Either like 50% of them need it to boost the yield or the quality of the fruit. And of the crops that are flowering, 75% of them need pollinators. And they're a great source of vitamins, minerals, and proteins. So fruits they're healthy kinds of food. They're interesting kind of foods. Vegetables are healthy and interesting, and greens, they're beautiful on your plate. The grains are also important for you, but they come from wind-pollinated foods, and they're kind of blah and dull and kind of brown like that, right? Not as interesting. You won't die, but you kind of get sick of eating bread, right? So let's talk about how this situation works out. What is pollination? It's actually flower sex. So there's been a relationship built between bees and flowers for over 100 million years. The flowers produce nectar in their base that the bees want to go get to feed to their brood and also to use as kind of their gasoline, their fuel for getting around. They also collect the pollen, which is a protein source that they put in their nest. But this pollen source is the male part. It's the fuzzy part that when you brush up against a flower, the little particles will get onto you, and if you're allergic, it's going to make you sneeze. But that's the male part, and it needs to get onto the female part. And in order to do that, some plants have to have an insect to move that pollen to the female part so that the pollen will grow a tube down the stalk into the ovaries, and the ovaries produce seeds. And we either want the seeds from the plants, or we'll want the fleshy stuff, like cherries, that grow around that pit, which is the seed. So we eat the fleshy stuff that grows around seeds. But without that production of a seed, you never get the fruity part we like to eat. Okay, so who are pollinators? They're not just bees. They are also flies and birds and bats that are mammals. And what we find is that bee pollination accounts for 8% of the production of the world's food. It's a $600 billion value, the effect of pollination. So here's some examples of fruits and nuts that are anywhere from 70 to 100% dependent on bees for pollination. Without the bees, we would not get almonds. We wouldn't get almonds. They just wouldn't get pollinated. For some of the vegetables and fruits that are kind of field crops, kind of laying on the ground, honeybees, bumblebees, and these solitary bees, which are squash bees, seen in this squash flower, are very important for pollination of these because there's male and female flowers, and they actually really have to move. The pollen has to really be moved from a male flower to a female flower. And all of these are in the squash family. All of these plants are. And we eat them all. And tomatoes are a different family, and they require bumblebees for a different reason, which you'll see in a bit. We also harvest seeds for just eating outright, like sunflower seeds, or for growing more crops. So we grow things from seed. Or like canola that we grind up and get oils from for cooking. You probably all have canola oil in your house for cooking. And there's some specialist bees that revisit those flowers and some generalists. We also grow alfalfa seed, and that's another thing that I work on. A lot of alfalfa seed is grown in this state. We're just going to have a walk around Walmart now so we can take a little appreciation of bees. Look how beautiful Walmart is when you have all this fruit in it. It's gorgeous. Without bees, this would be just an empty brown stack of boxes. It would be so unfun to go shopping. Here's you have more fruit from trees and also berries from bushes and on the ground. Peppers are bumblebee pollinated. And then like carrots, we get the seeds from the bees to make carrots. And, oh, wait a minute. Milk? Why did I take a picture of milk thinking about pollination? Oh, I see some hands over here. I'm going to go with you. You had your hands up first, right there. Absolutely. Who knows? So he said bees will make the plants that cows eat. And I guess we get milk from cows? Yep. Oh, okay. All right. So what might that plant be? You. Alfalfa, right? I just showed you the seeds, right? We got to get those big fields of alfalfa from somewhere. They're from seeds. And yeah, cows eat. We also get meat from cows, right? So alfalfa gives us a lot. So we get yogurt, we get cheeses, we get butter. Oh my gosh, we get ice cream. Without bees, life would suck. Oh, and we also get almond milk. But does almond milk come from a cow? It comes from what? Comes from almond, and I just told you that 100% pollination is needed for almonds. So almond milk, all for bees. Let's talk about some special situations where it really takes a unique bee to bring us the fruit or vegetable or whatever we want. So the specialist bee said, I am special, I am great. For particular flowers that I pollinate, I move my body on flowers just so, placing the pollen where it needs to go. Officially working in complex crop systems, I'll reliably perform with natural precision. Let's look at some of these special bees. They're special because they can do what honeybees don't do so well. They'll be out at the right time for the bloom of the flowers. They'll move around for the pollination needs of the flower just so. They'll handle the flowers in certain ways that expose the pollen to get to the female parts. And they might just prefer certain flowers over the others, so they're very dependable to go to just that type of flower. So I'm going to show you 3 examples listed here. First is the Social Bumblebee, and it does a special thing called buzz pollination. And it does this on plants like tomatoes, blueberries, eggplants, and cranberries. I'm going to show you about a 2-minute clip of exactly how this works. This is a great clip that you can look up yourself online as well. Okay. All right, so that's the special chore that a bumblebee can do. There's another special thing that the solitary bee, the blue orchard bee, can do, and this is one of my bees that I study. And it's an excellent pollinator of fruit trees and nut trees like almonds and cherries, but also of pears and apples. So let me tell you about what has to happen in an almond orchard for pollination to occur. You notice that I've labeled all of these rows of trees with a different name because each one is a different variety of almond. And in almonds, you have to get one variety to another row, another variety. You can't just stay in the same tree or stay in the same row. So you really have to move around and move around, move all that pollen around. And the honeybee only does this most of the time. She methodically goes from flower to flower to flower. She's a very systematic worker. And she doesn't go bump around between rows as much as an orchard bee that does something like this. She's like a crazy lady out there, flying around, buzzing around, visiting flowers all over the place. You can't even hardly see her out there. But when you put these two bees together in an almond orchard, our research has shown that you get more almonds than when you have either of those bees alone. There's an effect of them visiting together that makes almond production even better. And we're learning that also for pears and for cherries. It's pretty cool. So what makes this bee so effective? Well, not only is its behavior interesting, but also the blue orchard bee has rows of hairs on the underside of her belly that are special for picking up pollen. And the way she visits a flower, she kind of shimmies all over it when she's trying to get the nectar and the pollen and gather all that. And she's collected that pollen very dry. Compare that to a honeybee that when she collects the pollen, she packs it in real tight into these pellets. It's because she's bringing those whole pellets back to her hive, and then all those worker bees are going to process it and smash it around and knead it and make special bee bread. Okay? But not the orchard bee. She just kind of hangs out and lets it be loose, and it goes all over the place. And she'll also fly in cooler weather. She's a spring bee. She loves the cool weather and will fly when it's cooler than honeybees. And this is how we manage them out in the orchards. This is also from my research, where we put out boxes for the bees to be in and with tubes, and there you can see they're all strewn throughout the orchard. But we have to put the bees out there, so we warm the bees up and they start chewing out of their cocoons, and then we hang the boxes up in the trees, and the bees fly out from there, and then they build their nest inside those tubes. These bees also, though, they're called mason bees because they use mud. Another thing we have to make sure we provide to them is a moist soil. It can't be dry as a desert out there. They have to have moist soil because they like the springness, but they use that to make their partitions in their cells. But these bees, I told you before, can live up to 6 weeks. And almond bloom only lasts about a week, maybe a little longer. It's pretty fast. So what do these bees do to keep nesting when all that bloom is gone? Especially in a landscape that looks like this when the bloom is gone. When the almond bloom's over, nothing, nada, is on the ground for them to visit. No other trees are blooming, no dandelions, no anything. So what my research team has helped to do is to put flowers out there for the bees. So the flowers that will bloom in the springtime, and we put out just acres and acres of these flowers, and indeed we had the bees nest to like 4 weeks and put enough new bees out there to where we had enough to use for the next year. So that's how we kind of build sustainable populations of commercial bees. So in a landscape like we're working in next is in cherries in Washington, and the landscape is more varied. And so we think that we don't have to supply extra floral resources for bees in a landscape like this, because you can even see in the foreground of this picture, there's some yellow flowers already blooming at the time that the bloom of the cherries are coming on. And this is cherries right here in Utah. Same thing. Look at the ground cover here. It's not bare. It's got dandelions and stuff in it. So these are really good habitats for us to put the bees out to use as good pollinators and to produce more bees to use the next year. It's a good system. Let's move on to alfalfa, those bees that make ice cream for you. Is what we're going to talk about next. Alfalfa flowers are really cool. They need to be tripped in order to be pollinated. And so you can see that you can't find the anthers here, the pollen, the male parts. But if a bee presses on this keel right here, pop, It comes out. It just needs a little pressure, a little poke. And you can see, look at all this pollen splattered out behind this bee. And that pollen is getting all over her so she can transfer it to the next flower. Well, the weird thing is that honeybees don't like this, and they won't do it. And let me show you, prove it to you, because I needed to. I was like, oh, no way, because it's so easy to push this open. But if you'll notice, this honeybee has no pollen on her legs. She doesn't have that pellet. And you don't see like a yellow pop of that's what's called a staminal column come out. Now I know that went pretty fast. I'm going to show it to you in slow-mo too. So see how she's handling the flowers? She's moving kind of to the side, and she's somehow avoiding pushing that down. They don't like getting flicked in the face. Now, if she's a real young bee who's doing this for the first time, she might pop it open, and then she'll be like, ah, not again, and she'll learn to go around. Okay, let's compare that to a leaf-cutting bee. If you notice, her belly has got white hairs on it, but in this case, they're already covered with pollen from this alfalfa. And this is just up the road. I filmed this. Pop, pop, pop. She is busting those things open. Look at all the pollen on her face. That was really fast. Let's see it again in a little bit slow-mo. Whoops. It didn't move down. Here we go. Now watch. She comes in. She presses on it, and there it is. Popped open. Pollen's on her face. She's moving that pollen to the next flower, and to the next flower, and to the next plant. Excellent pollinator. When you use those bees, you can go from 300 pounds per acre using only honeybees, 300 pounds per acre of seed, to 1,000 pounds per acre with these bees. It's so cool. And people have known this for like 60 years. So I didn't invent that. I'm just trying to help propagate the bees better. So this is what it's like to manage those bees in the field. So this is a field, an alfalfa field over in Tremont, Utah. And we provide bee boards for the bees to nest in. And they warm up the bees in these trays and let the bees fly out of the trays. And they use 45 to 60,000 bees per acre for pollination. All right. The last part I'm going to tell you about is some things you may have heard of or you're nervous about. And that's like that the bees are in peril or the environment is scary for bees. So the foraging bees can tell us a little about it. We fly and we walk and we dig and we groom in landscapes where many dangers may loom. Parasites, pathogens, and poisons are found in flowers, on leaves, and even in the ground. We need safe harbor and a variety of food to assure crop pollination and provisions for brood. This is a kind of headline we don't like to see. This is just from 2018 to 19. It was the highest winter loss of bees ever recorded since we've been keeping good records of it in the last 13 years. 40% of the colonies in the United States were dead after winter. And it makes managing honeybees for commercial use hard, and then also very expensive to rent because they're in short supply and they take a lot of effort to get going. But the number one cause of the bee loss is just winter kill. They just don't survive the winter. And that's because they have varroa mites, which kind of suck the life out of them. They don't kill them, but they make them a little weak. But those varroa mites also help to transmit diseases, which are like viruses. And then the location of the bees may be that it's just too cold for them or too dry for them. And it might not be the right genetic strain of bees, that they're just not good at surviving the winter. The other thing you may have heard of and or worried about is colony collapse disorder, CCD. It got a lot of news starting around 2006, when what people found were dead colonies that had no, like worker adults, but they also had no dead bodies. It wasn't like they just got sprayed and died right there. But the queen was still there, and there was some brood still there sometimes, and still some honey. So where did all those workers go? It was as if they just flew away and died somewhere. So it's not a general term that covers all death of managed bees. And to date, there's not one cause known. No real reason that we've ever figured out this exact thing happens. But what we do know now is that the number of people reporting this kind of condition has really gone down recently. And it's probably because we've figured out other things, like this winter kill thing, that's really the biggest problem we have. And what we really think is happening to the bees is an interacting thing. And it's what we call the 4 Ps. It's pest, it's pathogens, it's pesticides, it's poor nutrition. So they get unwelcome visitors who make them sick. They get viruses and bacteria. The pesticides that are sprayed might not make them drop dead, but make them feel bad or weaken their immune systems. And then they may not have a good diversity of food. They're not having a good plate of food. It's not colorful. So when you have these individual things that can make a colony kind of sick, but interacting effects, it becomes overwhelming. And then that's the way you have too many of these things all at once, and then that's when we lose some of the beehives. So a stressful situation that's going on right now in California is almond pollination. It is blooming right now. And there are over 1 million acres of almonds in California that need pollinators. And they need 2 honeybee colonies per acre. So many of the colonies in the US are in California right now doing a lot of hard work to make you almonds. And this is how they get shipped out of there. This is stressful, getting shipped from Florida to California on a truck. And this is what it looks like when they're sitting around waiting for bloom to happen. How many flowers do you see out there? It's a desert. It's a food desert for these bees. It's terrible. So the people who manage these bees, they do try to help them out by feeding them sugar water, and sometimes it's just squirted in there from a big tank. Or they put these patties that are got some protein and some vitamins and stuff in there that the bees can kind of feed on. But it doesn't replace Mother Nature. They don't get all of what they need. So it's a stressful situation. Then they get into the almonds, and then they get moved to cherries, and then they go to apples and blueberries and other crops, and they recover over time, and by the summer they're doing okay. And then they start all over again. So it's a tough situation. But bumblebees have been shown recently to be in decline, especially 4 species that were reported in 2011 as declining in abundance, 96% decline in abundance. And recently we've been able to kind of think about endangered species of bumblebees. And so all in the green, the 28 species here are doing okay. We don't have any records of them going extinct or not showing up in the numbers they used to. But these bees in orange and red, we're not finding them very often, and we're not sure where they're going. Probably there's a loss of habitat and also spread of disease, diseases that are particular to bumblebees. So we're watching these bees. We don't want to have extinction of bumblebees in this country. Solitary bees also have their problems. So they get a lot of natural enemies, like wasps that lay their eggs on the provisions that were meant for a bee, but instead you get a wasp or even a fly. And then other little tiny wasps that lay their eggs on the larvae of the bees and just eat the larva itself. The solitary bees get diseases. This is a chalk brood disease. And they also get hit with pesticides or pick it up even in the soil from the environment. If you're a mason bee picking up soil to use in your nest, you could be picking up pesticides that landed on that soil. What can you do? Well, you can use pesticides only when you really need them to keep your crop safe and beautiful for consumption. But only use the recommended amounts, don't overdo it. But you can provide flowers for the bees, and not just really beautiful flowers that might not give nectar and pollen, but wildflowers, crazy flowers, flowers that deer like to eat, and then also provide, let your yard be a little bit trashy. Don't cut everything down. If there's some pithy raspberry plants that you have in your garden, leave them there all winter because the bees can use those for nests. Leave thickets that bumblebees can get down into the winter and spend the winter in. So at any age, I hope you can appreciate all the wonder and the beauty of bees, just like my stepdaughters have, just like my old friend Vince does. So, and then lastly, I just want you to think again about all the reasons that be, so that you might say, to bees we are grateful for food on our plate that makes us grow strong and also tastes great. Veggies and fruit, nuts and seeds result from bee visits that meet flower needs. Bees help make cheese, yogurt, and ice cream, since alfalfa seeds need a pollinator team. Special, amazing, beautiful, diverse are words to describe the bees on our earth. We will provide for bees at our places by planting them flowers and providing safe spaces. Thank you.
Okay, tell me how you got to be the scientist you are today.
I'm an accidental entomologist. I just threw out my hat and I landed there. No, I grew up on a farm in Tennessee with my mom's farm, my mom's family's farm, and I was one of 9 kids, and I had there were 10 kids for 2 of other families in my neighborhood. They were my cousins, and we were always, the model of our parents was like, just get out in the yard and find something to do. So we were always exploring and having fun out in the yard doing something, and that meant we discovered a lot of organisms. And when I went to college, to Vanderbilt, I found that I really loved arthropods and invertebrates. And so eventually I decided to go to graduate school, and not really sure what I was going to do, not overly focused. And so I ended up in graduate school working on paper wasp, and then eventually I worked on boll weevils, termites, rare plant pollinators, and did a lot of teaching. And then eventually got offered this job out here where I started working on bees kind of for the first time. But what was interesting is that all along, all those doors that kind of opened for me and I dared to walk through them really led me to be really suited for the job that I have now, was with the federal government, which is paid for by taxpayers, and it's service to you and to agriculture. And I found that that's what I like, to help answer questions that helped other people and to kind of contribute in that way. So all the jobs that I did before kind of led to getting to do that. And so it's been a privilege to have this job, actually. And I really accidentally got there. I just needed to have a job and just did things.
Thanks very much, Theresa. Okay, we'll do about 10 minutes for questions. So, questions. Let's see. Does this work? Nah. I'm hoping this.
I don't hear anything.
Let me just check one thing, 'cause this is kind of fun, but. Oh, I see. It's going to work now. Good. Okay, so let's see. Right, ready?
Are there more types of generalist bees or specialist bees?
Yeah, there are more types of generalist bees. I can't say why, but the specialist, it's kind of a risky behavior to specialize too much, because if something happens to the plants that you specialize on, then where are you going to go? If you can only eat almond flowers and there were for some reason no more almond flowers, where would you go? So a lot of the super specialists are on kind of rare plants and they're rare relationships and they're very tight. So when you think about losing species, sometimes it's those very special ones that we lose, but most are generalists and some can switch. So yeah, but that's a good question. But there are more examples of generalists.
Next question. Okay, let's see. I'm going to run it up there and I'll be back, I promise. Okay, ready? Erica?
What about killer bees?
Killer bees. Well, they're just a honeybee, honestly. They're kind of like, dogs come in all different shapes and sizes, but they're all dogs. Well, there's lots of different kinds of honeybee races, sort of, is what they're called, varieties. Kind of like those almond flowers are different varieties of. And so killer bees only come up into, say, Texas and Arizona, California, but they can't come too far because they can't handle the cold weather, kind of like me. So we don't have to worry too much about them coming too far north, but they're actually really good pollinators. They're very aggressive in their ability to collect pollen and nectar, and that's why people wanted them to kind of work with them. But they kind of got loose and they spread. But you just have to learn to handle them with more care than you might with the more docile European strain instead of the African strain. And the European strains are what more people work with.
Okay, so do honeybees create their own, within the hive, their own like honeycomb structure, or is that man-made and the bees inhabit it?
We give it to them and they embellish it.
Cool.
It's kind of like that. They have wax glands. They create all that. But the bumblebees, all those waxy balls in there, they make these pots. That's all from wax glands of their own bodies. They'll start with just space and they'll fill it with these little pots. Stingless bees do the same thing in the tropics. They're social, and I didn't cover them because they're not many types of them, but yeah, so they just kind of embellish what we give them as starting places so that we get them to nest in the structures we want them in.
Cool.
Let's see. You good catch?
Do bees see color?
Yes, they do. But there's certain colors they cannot see that you can see, and there's certain colors that they can see that you cannot see. Does anybody know more about that? You want to talk? You want to answer? Can he answer that?
Here we go.
Some people already know this. It's kind of cool.
Bees can see in the ultraviolet side of the spectrum, and we cannot.
Right. And what can they not see?
I don't know about. Probably like red or
Red.
something.
It is red. Yeah. Birds
Flowers.
focus on red. And actually, I think some bumblebees can kind of see red. But yeah, so the ultraviolet, when we see a flower, we don't see it at all. But if we use a special lens on a camera, we can look at a flower, and it might have like lines pointing to where the nectar is in the flower. It's called nectar guide. And so the bees can see it, but we can't. And sometimes it's white or purple to our vision, but it's very apparent to them.
So I see a couple of hands.
I want to know how they know where their house is.
I just read a chapter about that today in hard detail. But mostly what they do is they smell it and they see it. So they kind of see the structure and the shape from a distance. And as they get closer, they can smell it. But what they have done is when they made that nest, they have special glands in their back end, and they kind of shimmy around inside their nest and kind of put their odor down on it, so they scent mark it. So they make it their own special odors. And sometimes I think their sisters can recognize it too. So when they nest around each other, they know it. But they come to a hole in the ground or one of those like holes in one of those boards, and they'll like go in and they'll be like, whoa, that's the wrong house. They'll smell it, and then they'll go around and find their own. But yeah, so they smell it and they see it. Oh, they also navigate by the polar rays, so they get there from a long distance.
Let's see. Towards Eric's direction. You catch?
What is your favorite kind of bee?
Oh, that's like asking who's your favorite kid. You can't ask that. I really do love the bees that I study because they're the ones I know the most. So that the leaf cutting bee and then the orchard bee, just because I interact with them most, but they're just also beautiful and special in their own ways. I really can't say. I'm sorry about that, but I just refuse to pick.
So, what can someone with relatively limited land resources do to help local pollinators? For example, I'm living in an apartment. I plan to have a garden this year, but I have just a little to work with.
Yeah. Well, you can't do everything. But there are community gardens you can be part of. Mm-hmm. You can be more of a social network, kind of, go together with some people that have more landscape. I mean, you can put some flowers or like even, just wildflower plants and daisies and stuff back in your apartment and stuff. But, you'll feed mostly honeybees that way if you don't have bare ground nearby where other kinds of bees can nest, just you spread the word and be a part of, and think about what food you buy and what you eat and how perfect it has to be. Does it have to be perfect? Do we have to use more pesticides to keep all the pests away and have exactly the right shape, which is the reason to have good pollination too, is shape of fruit. So just think about culturally what you would purchase too.
That's going to be a long pass, and I'm going to just run this one up. Okay, I'm in passing range. Ready?
What do bees do in the winter?
They sleep, which we should be doing too. No, so they have to, they can't make their own heat. So most insects shut down for the winter, right? So they find like holes in the ground or eaves of the home, in a log, underground, And they just get to where their cells are specialized to where they don't super freeze. And so they can tolerate really, really cold weather, but they just don't do anything. They hardly breathe. But when the weather is just right and the sunshine is just right, they start, getting warmed up and they'll start developing again. So they're just sleeping. You're just not going to see any until that snow's all gone. Yeah. Good question.
Okay, Mark.
You had a needlepoint with a bee.
Oh.
It said be yourself.
Uh-huh.
Is that a colony bee?
Oh, is that?
Or is it a...
Oh. Well, even in a colony, you can have a personality.
Okay.
Even in a colony, you're a specialist on nectar or pollen. And the jobs you do are also age specific. When you're young, you're a nurse bee and you stay indoors where it's safe and you take care of other bees. When you get kind of older and crankier, they send you out to forage and you might die. That's okay because you're cranky anyway. So there's personalities for that too. But yeah, that's a pillow my sister gave me. I just thought it was good for this talk. It could be solitary too, yeah. Super independent.
One more.
Do bees affect the physiology of the plants? I guess I'm thinking do plants become more defended, or do they change their morphology because they're putting different resources into different parts of the plant?
Yeah, yes and yes and yes and yes in all different ways. Yeah, so some recent reports have shown that if the orchard bees, this is in Europe, someone has done this, the orchard bees, when they are pollinating the fruit, some people have said and reported, and I think it's in the literature now, that the shelf life is enhanced. So like we store apples, and shelf life is important so that they're good all, winter long and they stay, in cold storage, and that the apples will stay even longer if they've been pollinated by this particular bee. So what it's done physiology, I'm not really sure. But the other thing about like shape and stuff is, say an apple, an apple needs to be visited many times to get all the ovaries or ovules pollinated. And if all the seeds aren't pollinated, then you get like a misshapen fruit. And the same with pears. And if it's not like the right shape, you don't get the good market value on it because people want a perfect piece of fruit. So there's that kind of, help to shape the fruit. But the exact physiology, that's a good question. Like when the alfalfa bees pollinate or visit the flowers in alfalfa, that alfalfa would keep producing flowers unless the flowers have been pollinated and start becoming seeds. And the resources go towards seeds, and they quit producing as many flowers because there's not enough resources to go around. So yes, and yes in many different weird ways. Yeah.
Cool.
Uh-huh.
Okay, what I would like to do is thank Theresa one more time, and we have a
Oh, I get a gift.
Very modest, yeah. Theresa, thank you.
Oh, thank you.